Reporter extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien joins us this morning. Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well.
Do you have any thoughts on all of this? We can talk about the SCOTUS stuff, but I figured I'd give you a chance if you wanted to comment on all this nonsense.
Oh, man, I don't know what to think. You know, at first I thought maybe that they weren't saying anything because there was investigations underway and potential prosecutions, but I'm just unclear as to what's going on. I agree. I think that transparency really would be warranted here. Find out how do we go from the comment where Attorney General Bondi says that made it certainly sounded like this list was on her desk, and now, I didn't say that. Well, what's going on?
Well, see, and that to me speaks to this disconnect between the public perception of what the Department of Justice, what former administrations may have had in terms of evidence and the speculation, and what the reality actually is of the information that they had. And this is where I think the disconnect is taking place. It's because you have so many conservative commentators that have made so many different allegations and speculative claims over the course of many years. And suddenly you have this expectation that Trump's going to get into the White House and all of these things that have been said for all this time are suddenly going to come to light. And then when they do, it's way more boring and way less detailed than all the speculation that was taking place before. And I feel like that's where there's this massive disconnect in the commentary around this particular issue.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, anytime that there's not full transparency is what leads to some of these conspiracy theories. I mean, who knows? Maybe in 60 years, another president will be issuing an executive order for the release of the Epstein files, just the way that President Trump is, signing executive orders to release the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. I don't know.
It was interesting, and I'll end on this, and we'll get you the talkbacks coming up here in a bit, and we'll dive into the issue that I actually had you on the show for this morning. But I saw a clip from Dan Bongino yesterday, and he was on the Tim Pool podcast. This was from, I don't know, like a year or so ago. I mean, long before he became a part of the Trump administration. And he was telling a story about sitting in the green room at Fox News, getting ready to go on to do an appearance. And he wouldn't say who the individual was he was speaking to. He just said, I'm talking to this individual, prominent person within commentary, and they were telling me about how Jeffrey Epstein was this CIA asset, something to this effect. And, Dan Bongino was telling this story as if to say that he was believing what this individual was saying. And I'm kind of scratching my head going, okay, well, again, this is pure speculation. I mean, did you get any further evidence of that, or are you just providing that out to just tell a story for the sake of telling a story? And I think that's where a lot of the assumptions were born out of. It was commentary like that wasn't really rooted in anything tangible, hasn't been presented with anything tangible in terms of evidence, and people's minds wander. People speculate even further, and it's created this mess, Jeff. And it's unfortunate to see it happen because there's a lot of winning going on right now with President Donald Trump, and I kind of understand his frustration yesterday when that reporter asked the question when they were there to talk about more substantive issues.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, it's we're dealing with bigger issues right now, but I do think some sort of explanation is in order at some point here. I
would imagine they're going to. And like I mentioned earlier, I think President Donald Trump, usually when he sees rifts in MAGA land, he tends to want to go and address those. So the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday did clear the way for President Donald Trump to resume his plans to cut the federal workforce and restructure agencies, a key promise he made on the campaign trail to hack away at the size of the federal government. So once again, you had the liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the sole member of the 9-person court to publicly dissent from the decision. She wrote that the San Francisco-based U.S. district judge, that her temporary practical harm-reducing preservation of the status quo was no match for this court's demonstrated enthusiasm for greenlighting this president's legally dubious actions in an emergency posture. So she was the only one to go in dissent, and this time it ended up being Justice Sotomayor who pushed back on Brown's claims. And again, this is the second time in 2 weeks where a Supreme Court justice has scolded Brown for not understanding what she's talking about. I mean, is she just that clueless, Jeff O'Brien?
So I don't know what to think. I mean, she's, I've read that she's now like of the justices when they're at oral argument, she talks more than the other 8 justices. This is an opinion. It's like an emergency opinion on an application for a stay of an injunction issued by a lower court, and it came through Justice Kagan because it was Ninth Circuit. So I think that's where she has. It's like any Ninth Circuit emergency petitions go through her to start with, and so there's no really a majority opinion on this. Justice Sotomayor has this one paragraph concurrence, and then Justice Jackson has this long dissent, and saying that they're taking away congressional authority and this is unlawful and blah blah blah. And Justice Sotomayor's little concurrence just says, yeah, he can't restructure federal agencies in a manner inconsistent with congressional mandates, but the plan, but the executive order directs agencies to plan reorgs and reductions in force, quote unquote, consistent with applicable law. And she said the plans themselves are not before this court, and we can't. Basically said that's not the issue we're deciding here. It's like Justice Jackson wants to go to the next issue of immediately assume that these plans are going to be done unlawfully and just be done with it. And I don't think that she's intelligent. She's graduated law school.
Sure.
Worked at the Supreme Court. She's had a distinguished career as a jurist, but she seems to, the best I can fathom is, if Trump derangement syndrome is a thing, she's been dealing with it big time. Because this is even when she was on the district court as a federal district court judge during his first term, she issued some rulings that the Court of Appeals later overturned. But she just wants to seemingly assume that everything the man does is bad, so I'm just going to knock it down, this is the same dangerous philosophy that was, inherent in the universal injunctions and what Justice Barrett, shot back at in the CASA case is, presidents aren't above the law and nor are judges. You don't have this imperial judiciary that's the final arbiter of everything. And so this was a little bit more muted than how Justice Barrett handled Justice Jackson's dissent in that case.
Well, and I would agree that it was more muted, but I think that it was more because sort of, ideology aligned, Sotomayor decided to be a little tamer in her criticism of Brown. I think the fact that she criticized Brown at all speaks volumes to the frustration that the rest of the court seems to be feeling over Brown. Have we ever seen a Supreme Court justice sort of be questioned in this way in terms of their decision making? I mean, beyond when it comes to their own political leanings. I mean, can you recall a time before when a justice has sort of been scolded by other justices in the way that Brown has?
I mean, they scold each other all the time on their majority opinions and their dissents, and they point out, flaws in their reasoning. And Justice Scalia could always write with a flourish when he would do it too, particularly in his dissents. If he was fired up, he'd come at the majority, right? But you get this when these opinions keep stacking up one after another from all angles of the court. One gets the opinion that there may be an element of frustration here with something that Justice Jackson is doing or saying or writing.
I have a quick clip here. It's about a minute long. On Jesse Waters' Fox News last night, they were talking about this very issue that we're discussing right now. I've got lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien on with me. Trump did, have another victory yesterday. The court says the administration can resume these mass layoffs of federal workers. This was one of the first moves that we saw of the district judges blocking Trump's agenda. Of course, the Supreme Court ruled they can no longer do that. I have a question for you regarding that here in just a moment. First off, though, let's play this clip from Jesse Waters, Fox News last night, talking about Justice Brown.
It's funny to me how people focus on how much I talk at oral argument. And I was always this person on the bench. And so it's been a bit of an adjustment because as a trial court judge, you have your own courtroom. So you can go on as long as you want. And so trying to make sure that my colleagues get to ask some questions has been a challenge for me. But I've enjoyed it. I really have.
They haven't. No wonder Ketanji speaks so much. She can't figure out what's going on.
I don't understand how we can do it on this record, but I guess I don't understand that given your argument. I guess I don't really understand it. I guess I don't understand. Am I mischaracterizing? I don't understand where this idea of universal injunctions comes from. And that's the part that I don't understand.
Last week, the court decided a case 8-1. The one dissent? Jackson. Her dissent was so ridiculous that even Sotomayor had to tell her she didn't understand the case. I agree with Justice Jackson. Here, however, the plans themselves are not before this court.
Now, Jeff, when we exchanged text yesterday, I kind of referred to Brown as being a clown, but you had made a comment that it was actually sort of more nefarious than that. You had more concerns over her just sort of being a clown, maybe suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. What's ultimately like your larger concern with Brown on the Supreme Court?
Well, my concern here, John, and Justice Jackson is not the only judge on the bench that holds this judicial philosophy of we don't like the result, so we're going to work backwards to come up with the law to get to the result that we think is just, right? And, it's almost, I think Justice Barrett hit it harder, that it's almost like this philosophy is unmoored from anything in the Constitution that would restrict the exercise of that philosophy. And this is where these universal injunctions, as they call them, are coming from. It's this attitude amongst judges, and they happen to be, largely appointed by Democrat presidents, that if the judges don't like what the executive branch is doing, they can simply say it's unlawful and stop it. And that's not, we have a checks and balances system and separation of powers. That's not how the system necessarily works. And so that's what's dangerous here is, she's an outlier on the current court in that philosophy. But it's something to think about, as we go forward in the years, and, these judges don't get any younger. They have lifetime appointments. Should that philosophy ever become the majority on that court, I'm concerned as to where things would go.
Last question for you really quick, talking with lawyer extraordinaire Jeff O'Brien. We had the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court ruling against the district judges' injunctions to stop the actions of President Donald Trump. This was another, example of those actions being slapped down. But you had this judge this week that moved to block the defunding of Planned Parenthood in the One Big Beautiful bill. So on the one hand, you had the justices saying that these district judges can't block the Trump's actions in that, injunction way, but yet this judge can still move forward relating to an act of Congress in a bill to restore the funding to Planned Parenthood?
This John, this all comes from that same philosophy. You have political activists on the bench and trying to get to a certain result and literally making it up as they go. That issue will likely come before the court in a similar way that this one has. And my guess is the Supreme Court will speak again. And if these district court judges want to keep basically disobeying the Supreme Court orders, there should be consequences for that. I believe in the federal system. I believe that the Supreme Court does have the authority to reassign a case. And if we're going to keep going through this pattern of this lawfare of, President Trump's opponents, forum shopping to find a friendly judge, I think it might be time to start taking these cases away. And if those judges aren't just going to simply uphold the court's orders.
Lawyer extraordinaire, Jeff O'Brien. I'd rather have you serving on the Supreme Court than Brown, but I think that's a given. Thank you for the time this morning, my friend. It was great talking with you.
Sounds good. I'm having too much fun doing what I'm doing. I would be bored.
I hear you on that. That's why I'd never run for office. We'll talk to you again real soon, buddy.
Thanks, John.